now you're in the heart of it, in the restaurant business, working at Dreyfus. Um, Tell us, COVID was might have been good for wineries in that they sort of pivoted and did more direct to consumer wine sales. But tell us about the impact for restaurants. What happened there? I mean, I know the economic impact was severe when they had to be closed down, but what's happened since, especially as it impacts restaurant wine lists?
We've definitely, I've reported this at Forbes as well. We've seen a big shift in consumer education over the pandemic because we didn't have rest because restaurants weren't open. Guests didn't have that sommelier connection to help them pick their wines for them. So we saw customers and guests and wine drinkers going out of their way to learn more. They had to be their own sommeliers over the pandemic. So people really, they started researching regions, they started researching producers they like, they started looking into why they like that wine. Was it, if it's a Grenache, why do they like that heavier body? Or do they like a medium body? What's similar? So we saw this huge jump in kind of education. I've seen it among friends as well, friends who weren't really interested in wine before, all of a sudden kind of reaching out and asking me for advice. What should they try? Or saying, hey, I've tried this really cool pet nat or skin contact thing. What is it? How do I try more? So we've
Right.
had this really interesting kind of jump in education among kind of the entry level wine drinker and above entry level as well, which is really interesting coming back into the world reopening. We're seeing people all of a sudden know what like a trousseau is or a bastarda is and how that connection is. They know what they like to drink. They are very excited to learn more about that, which
Yeah,
as
I've seen
someone
this.
who recommends wine, it's very exciting for me to be able to have these fun educational conversations.
Absolutely. I've seen that same jump in my online wine and food pairing courses. I mean, just people had to take online courses if they wanted to take any courses at all. But yeah, there's a real thirst for knowledge, and so that's great. As a sommelier, you're now engaging with more educated consumers. Did COVID or the lockdown change your physical wine list or inventory in certain ways, or not just at Dreyfus, but perhaps at other restaurants that you've noticed?
There has been major shipping delays due to COVID, due to the kind of entire supply chain. So I've seen a lot of restaurants will maybe things from Sicily are 6 months late, or champagne is a certain amount late, or so we're seeing kind of a shortage in wine almost across the country from, well, probably across the world from just shipping, general shipping delays. We're not getting things as quick as we can. We're not able to replenish lists as quick as we can, as we used
And
to
so,
be
how do
able.
you fill that gap?
That sometimes you have to look local, like, or make other solutions. It's kind of a, you have to take it in stride and see what's available. There's not much
Sure.
we can do about a ship getting stuck in a canal around the world, which limits our champagne stock, etc. So,
Yeah,
kind of like everything has had to be over the last year, taking things in stride.
absolutely. And I read where you wrote somewhere that sadly some restaurants that had fabulous deep lists of different vintages of particular wines had to sell some of that stock off just to stay in business. Um, were there many restaurants having to do that?
We saw that a lot in major, well, probably across North America at the beginning of the pandemic when everything was kind of in flux and no one knew how long this was going to last without in person dining, and some restaurants weren't able to swap to takeout. We saw lots of restaurants selling off their cellars to be able to keep the lights on, which is a harrowing situation for them to have to go to. Although it was a very exciting opportunity for the home collector because all of a sudden we have access to fantastic like bottles that were have either been sitting for years or were limited allocation in the first place. So you may have never even had the chance to own a bottle of that outside of drinking it at the restaurant. So if you're a collector, it was an absolute free for all. You probably were able to stock up on some fantastic bottles, but the restaurants, well, they did what they had to do to get through the last year.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And because consumers are more educated, has there been any pushback or commenting on prices? Because now they're very much aware of how much those bottles cost on the restaurant list and what the markup is.
I'm interested to see how that plays out. I think people are definitely aware of what things cost, although if you're curating your wine program smartly, you're maybe having limited allocation bottles that aren't available to the regular consumer. So people are excited and willing to pay for that. But I was thinking that recently, even I went out for a beer and I $12 for this beer, which I know costs $2 at the store. So that was a little, I guess I'm paying for the service and I was happy to have that experience, but there's that awareness now. We had to buy all our own wines for the last year, so we know how much everything costs.
Right, absolutely. And as they say, well, you probably know this adage, I've said it before, but customers will eat you poor and drink you rich. The margins are all in the beverages.
Exactly.
All right, so let's turn now to some trendy wines that you've written about. Tell us about Pet Nat, Pet Nat wines. What are they? What does that stand for? And yeah, take it away. Let us know what those are.
Well, Pet Nat you could consider like I don't know, a young baby version of a champagne. It's bottled in the second round of fermentation happens in the bottle. Rather than the second round of fermentation happening outside of the bottle, Pet Nat's bottled while it's undergoing that first round of fermentation. So all that.
So the first. So it's going to do the first and second in the
bottle. Yeah, so it all happens in bottle, which means it's very kind of unrefined. It's not as methodical a process as champagne, but it's very unrefined, loose, fresh. It's quite an exciting category because rather than stick to the kind of palette of champagne, those Chardonnay, Meunier, Pinot Noir, Arbonne, winemakers are making Pet Nat out of everything. So we're seeing sparkling happen across the board, any grape varietal you can ever imagine. It's a very kind of low effort wine. I love popping one open like at a dinner party on a hot summer night. It's not something you want to think too deeply about. It's not something you want to overly criticize. It's just fun, fresh, very affordable. I would never pay over maybe $25 for a bottle of Pet Nat, but it's very fun over the last year of the stress we had. It's a wonderful kind of low effort option.
Huh, okay, and it stands for Pétillant Naturel, or the natural ancestral method or something like that, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, Pétillant Naturel.
Okay, there we go. And do most wine regions make these Pet Nats, or are they really mostly focused in wine regions that would do sparkling wines normally?
You're seeing them out of really everywhere. The style has been made, similar style has been made in Gaillac, so forever, for decades and decades and decades now, but it's
Pet Nat. Gaillac?
South of France.
Okay.
It's one of the more historic wine regions down at the bottom of, I believe we're right south of Bordeaux there.
Okay.
So you've been seeing we've seen kind of similar styles been made for decades, but it's kind of come to a bit, the category has really had a little bit of a moment over the last decade, and we're seeing Pet Nats pop up everywhere. North America's having a big moment with it, but I've had some really fantastic ones out of Oregon, out of the Finger Lakes regions as well. Ontario has a few producers.
Who would you recommend in Canada and the U.S.? Just a couple of winery names that come to mind.
I love the Marigny. It's a project out of Oregon, I believe. Beautiful, like dark red Pet Nats, like a lot of kind of texture and character to them. Trail Estates has one that's always really fun out of Ontario as well. And Trainer, out in the county, has some fun options for affordable bottles. Great introductory to the category.
Oh, that's great. And you were saying earlier, the first fermentation happens inside the bottle. Are there actually two fermentations or just one, and that first one takes place inside the bottle?
I believe it's just the one.
Just the one. Okay, great. And so therefore they're not disgorging all the dead yeast cells. So there's lots of little floaty bits in these things, are there?
Lots of floaty bits.
Okay. And nothing to be afraid of. That's the stuffing, that's the taste. I always say it's kind of like the pan where you're, trying to get the last bits of fat or onion after you've been frying. It's all the umami and the flavor is in the floaty bits.
Yeah, exactly. Adds texture.
Yeah, exactly. And so are they usually closed with what do they call it? A crown cap versus a mushroom cork as well?
Yeah, usually crown cap. These are very much not meant for aging.
Okay.
So they don't really need that cork.
Okay, all right. Let's talk about another wine that's new and trendy. I believe it's a still wine. I haven't written about either of these two yet, so I'm relying on you and asking very basic questions here, Kate. But what is piquette?
So piquettes are actually another one having a moment right now. It's a low ABV. I don't even know if you can technically call it wine because it's so low AB, it's so low alcohol. It's made by re-fermenting the extra kind of dredges and pomace of that winemaking process. So all the seeds, the skins, and the pulp that's left after the juice has been pressed. So you're re-fermenting that. It's fizzy, it's fresh, it's low alcoholic. Historically, piquette was what the winemakers and the field workers would drink. In kind of back in the day, you didn't really have access to fresh water, and people wanted to sip something while working the fields or at lunch. So they had everything around. It's just made with the leftovers and re-fermenting that. So it costs nothing for the wineries to make. Looking to kind of today, it's sustainable. You would have just composted those leftovers. So I think that's why it's having a bit of a moment right now. So it's slightly sparkling, refreshing, very aromatic, very easy to drink.
Huh.
It's
kind
nice
of like nose to tail cooking, using all the parts of the wine.
Exactly. One of a winemaker I really like, Martha Stewman out in California, actually was saying that yesterday their compost bin didn't arrive in time. So she's like, I guess we'll make some piquette rather than throw everything out.
That's great. And so it's the grapes and the skins and the leftovers. Would that make the wine taste a little bitter?
Red Tail out in the county sweetens theirs, but no, it's not very concentrated. It's just like light and refreshing. So it's not as concentrated as you would get. So not really bitter.
Okay. And so alcohol wise, would it clock in around, I don't know, 5-6%, or what would it be?
It depends on the producer, anywhere between 3 and 10.
Oh, okay. Okay. But definitely lower than average table wines of 12 to 14%. So that is refreshing.
It is nice if you're kind of conscious of your consumption, or if you're drinking during the day. It's a really nice alternative.
Awesome. So let's talk about your tasting process. Your home must be filled with wine bottles. How do you approach tasting wine with all the samples and things that you must receive?
I kind of try and mark a day in my week where I do everything at once, just so I can have kind of comparative options. I try and do things with friends as well. My partner doesn't drink, so I'll usually drink with friends and have I love to have another palate weigh in on things, because just to remove any bias I may have. So I try and kind of have friends also in my wine circle try things.
And do you, just process wise, do you taste whites first, then reds, or do you reverse those, or are there any sort of approaches you use?
I try and group everything together. So if I need to look at whites, I'll try and just do all the whites in the one day and reds in another.
Okay, great. Yeah, that is good for comparison. Do you ever find it hard to turn off the critical mind when you're drinking wine, like just even for pleasure?
Absolutely. I was with one of my friends last night, and he's making wine. And I honestly thought it would be a lot worse what it was, but immediately my mind goes to like, oh, da, 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 like going through my own tasting notes. So it's definitely hard to turn off sometimes, but I can do it.
That's good. So let's just do some sort of quick answers, lightning round. Is there something that you believe about wine that others would probably, or there might be others who would disagree with you on that point?
One of my dear family friends is a firm believer that he will only drink old world wine. So we've had a continuous conversation where I bring from a region that isn't France to try and get him interested. We're still going back and forth on this. I haven't really had a win on that one, but okay. I'm definitely excited about we've continued to have that kind of new world versus old world discussion.
Oh, that's good. Keep trying.
I'm trying.
Do you have a favorite childhood food that you love that today you might enjoy, and which wine would you pair with it?
Growing up, I loved shrimp chips.
Oh,
I would go through bags and bags and bags of them. So today, still on a Sunday night, if I'm kind of watching movies, I'll get in my pajamas and open a bag. And I really love pairing them now with like a super oxidative Jura white.
Oh,
It just
wow.
works really well and balances out that kind of like shrimpy umami natures.
Oh, that's great. Durell White, is that the name of the winery or a region?
Jura.
Oh, Jura, sorry. Didn't pick it up. Okay, Jura in France, right?
In France.
Yeah, okay. And shrimp chips, I've never heard of those. I'm going to have to look for those.
Yeah,
That
they're
sounds
like a big dim
delicious.
sum staple.
Cool. What's the weirdest wine pairing you've ever had?
I was in China, in, well, Macau for work a few years back, and we were doing a big hot pot dinner with some friends there, and they insisted on pairing everything with like Blanc de Blanc champagne. And
Oh,
I was like,
wow.
that's a really weird move, but it worked so well. It cut through all like the fattiness and the richness so perfectly, and I now am such an advocator, well, for champagne, bubbles with everything, but that was a
Yes.
really nice one.
Oh, awesome. There wasn't any that did not work, like any of their dishes that did not work with Blanc de Blanc?
It worked really well through everything. It was
Okay,
nice. Like we
okay.
had
And
lobster
Blanc de
in the
Blanc,
pot. We
yeah.
had kind of we got everything, a full spread of it, and it just worked so well through everything we were throwing in that hot pot.
Oh, wow. And Blanc de Blanc, just for those who are listening who may not know, is white wine made from white grapes. So usually, if we're talking champagne, it's 100% Chardonnay grapes. Um, okay, and so do you have a memorable wine that you were ever given as a gift?
Back to that Penedes story, I was going on to travel throughout Europe for a couple different trips, so I wasn't able to bring any wine home. I just had so many internal flights, it would have ended up costing me a hilarious amount of money to bring wine home through checking bags, so I wasn't able to bring any home. So I had a friend recently find me a bottle from that winery I had mentioned earlier,
Mm,
a bottle of cava from them, and managed to track one down and gave it to me for my birthday, and I was very excited.
how nice. Very thoughtful. What is your favorite wine that probably few of us have ever heard of?
I've been really loving Scarlet recently from Croatia. Refreshing and bright, but it takes on skin contact really well too. It gets this really beautiful herbaceous, like salty, like savory nature to it when it sits on the skins for an extended period of time. So does both things very well.
Oh, wow. And is that Scarlet, did you say?
Scarlet, Skrlet, out of Croatia.
Okay, and that's the name of a grape?
It's the name of a grape.
Okay, there you go. And what would you pair with it?
Seafood. Like
Okay,
Croatia is a big seafood
naturally.
capital, so what grows together goes together. I've also been really loving
Absolutely.
Bastarda too, out of Spain, like a really kind of trousseau, but not at a trousseau price. Silky, light red, nice for kind of like these in between.
And what do you mean by trousseau?
It's it is the Spanish version of trousseau.
Okay, okay.
Bastarda, yeah.
Yeah, great. Do you have a favorite wine book?
I really loved Italian Wine Grapes by Ian DeGata. Just like it's a book. There's so many beautiful stories about producers, grapes. It's something you can continue reading for years and years and years and always find some new information outside of.
And he's a marvelous writer. He's also a doctor by training and a Canadian.
And a
Yay!
Canadian, I know, there's that nice little connection.
You find them everywhere you go, Kate. Um,
Ooh,
if you could share a bottle of wine with anyone, living or dead, who would that be and which wine would you share?
I think Salvador Dali. I'm
The
not sure if
artist.
you're familiar with this, but he has a series of wine and cookbooks, and they're absolutely wild. He's written an
Wow.
entire book on wine, which, well, not a lot of people know of. I have the cookbook. I have not been able to track down the wine book, and it's just
Oh, nice.
fascinating. It's really, really interesting. So I'd let him bring the wine because he clearly knows some stuff, but yeah, he has just very odd Salvador Dali-esque recipes. It's a very fascinating read, and I'd love to hear what he has to say about wine.
So Salvador Dali, he was, I don't know if you call him abstract, but he had the sort of melting clocks and things, right?
Surrealist, yeah.
Surrealist. There you go. There's your art background. Um, and where was he from? Was it Spain?
I believe so.
Okay. Interesting. I have to look for that book. Um, All right. And if you could be any wine, Kate, which wine would you be and why?
Probably some sort of sparkling pet nat. I'm very bubbly, so
Yes. Perfect.
yes,
That's a
that
great
would
choice.
definitely fit the bill.
And not to be a downer or anything, but I always find this an interesting question. Which wine would you like to be served at your funeral,
I
which
want
is a long
bubbles.
time from now?
Yes,
Bubbles?
bubbles in everyone's hand. I'm in the camp, and funerals should be a place of celebration of life. So I want everyone drinking bubbles.
Awesome. Um, and what's one wine tip you could share with us now? Something for us to try this week? Piece of wine advice you find useful or helpful?
I would look. I kind of maybe back on that like Bastarda Trousseau situation. I'd kind of look at where grapes are produced outside the region. Like you can get some really beautiful kind of Trousseaus outside of Jura or traditional Trousseau areas. So just think about regions. Think about where wines are made and think about kind of different where new wines are made. It's
Yeah, great. Terrific. All right. Well, this has been fabulous. Is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to mention, Kate?
No, I think we've had a really kind of interesting chat. It was an absolute
yeah.
pleasure to finally get to meet you and finally chat through wine.
Absolutely, Kate. This has been wonderful. Where can people find you online?
I have my website, kate-dingwall.com, is a great place to kind of read through some of my old work, and will direct you to my social media as well, which is at my name. Very creative.
At Kate Dingwall. And so your website, kate-dingwall.com.
That's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kate. I really appreciate this. Some great stories and tips. Can't wait to chat with you again soon.
I know. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kate.